Friday nights were always the same at the Breyer house. Grant would bring over greasy takeout from that overpriced fusion place downtown. Mom would act surprised like she hadn't asked for it in the family group chat. Dad would pour himself a bourbon, nodding with his usual pride toward his eldest son. And me? I'd be handed a plate of microwaved leftovers. Last night's chicken thighs, dry rice, and the same glazed carrots I brought home from work 2 days ago. The smell of reheated food didn't bother me as much as the silence. Not silence in the room, but that was filled with laughter and clinking glasses. But the kind of silence where you're there, but not really. They spoke around me like I was the furniture, part of the backdrop to their celebration. Grant was leaning back in his chair, still in his tailored work shirt, talking about a client who just didn't get what quality looks like. Mom laughed like he'd told a joke. Dad followed up with one of his when I was your age tales, carefully excluding me from the narrative, as usual. My seat, far end of the table, the one with the chipped corner, the one no one else ever sat in. And then came the line, always a line. Dad looked over, his fork halfway to his mouth. Finish the leftovers, Calden. You can't afford restaurants anyway. The room broke into laughter. Grant snorted. Mom didn't skip a beat, adding, at least he's getting a meal without paying. I looked down at my plate. I didn't say a word for a few seconds. Then, calm as ever, I lifted my eyes and said, sure. It was that kind of sure that wasn't agreement. More like a placeholder for everything I didn't say, everything I swallowed. They didn't notice, or maybe they did, and chose to ignore it. Inside, though, something shifted. I remembered the overtime hours, the rent I helped pay when Dad's business hit a rough patch, the time I put off dental work so Grant could cover his down payment. See, they had this idea of manhood, that you prove your worth through silence, that suffering in the background is a badge of honor. They didn't realize I wasn't trying to earn anything anymore. All those years, every paycheck, every sacrifice, I handed it over without a word. Not because I was weak, because I thought family meant doing what needed to be done. But family, in this house, was conditional. The clinking of glasses brought me back. I took a slow bite, chewing through the dryness, pretending it didn't feel like gravel. I stayed quiet. Again. But my hands? They clenched just enough to remind me I was still here. 5 years ago, it was my sister's birthday. They'd gone to a steakhouse downtown, the kind with white tablecloths and valet parking. I showed up late from work, asked the hostess if I could join them. We didn't count you in, she said, eyes flicking to her chart. They said you'd be busy working anyway. I sat in my car that night, engine off, watching families walk in and out. My phone buzzed once. A photo from the table, everyone smiling, me not in it. That night, my grandmother had called. I hadn't told her what happened. She just said, a man's worth isn't in his paycheck, Calden. It's in how he holds his silence when he's disrespected. I didn't get it then. I do now. Back at the table, the jokes continued. You could at least heat it properly next time, Grant said, pointing at my plate. Don't be so sensitive, another sibling chimed in. I didn't respond. This time I wasn't going to defend myself. I stood up, slowly, still holding my plate, now empty, no slamming, no dramatic gestures, just a quiet rise that made the room pause. They watched me like I'd interrupted a sitcom. I walked past Grant, past Mom, past Dad. None of them looked directly at me. Why would they? Back in my room, the laughter was muffled by the door. I sat at my desk, pulled up an old file. I hadn't opened it in years. It was titled Family Support 2016 to 2023. Inside, PDF scans of bank transfers, receipts, emails confirming bills paid on their behalf, thousands of dollars, thousands of moments I'd chosen to stay silent. My eyes landed on one line item. March 2019, credit card payoff, Grant, $1,285. He never mentioned it again. I leaned back, let the room go quiet. On the shelf was a photo, Christmas, maybe 6 years ago. Everyone crammed into the frame, except me. I remembered standing just out of view, holding the camera. I right-clicked the file, selected rename, called it Reckoning. If they think silence is weakness, they're about to learn what it sounds like when silence becomes strategy. The laughter from downstairs had thinned to a dull hum, like the distant echo of a party I was never really invited to. My room sat above the kitchen, not by choice, just leftover space, and I could still hear them, plates clinking, voices blending into that familiar rhythm of exclusion. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the glow from my laptop like it held the answers I'd been avoiding for years. This house had taught me early. Silence wasn't peace. It was survival. Speak too much and you became the punchline. Push too hard and you were too sensitive. Stay quiet and at least they left you alone. But tonight, the silence tasted different. Not survival. Calculation. I clicked into the folder labeled Shared Expenses. Inside, neatly arranged, subfolders by year, each with files labeled Grant Loan 2021, Utilities April, Dad's Truck Tires, Mom's Emergency Room March 2018. Every file had a timestamp. Most had scans, receipts, emails, bank transfers, even hand-scribbled notes from my mother on torn envelopes. "We'll pay you back, Cal. Just not this month." I'd never expected repayment. That wasn't the point. But they made it clear. I was invisible unless they needed something. So I kept track, quietly. Not to throw it in their face, but because someday I'd need to remember who I really was and who they really were. I opened another folder. Dad's loan. There it was. The mortgage. Twice I covered overdue payments when the bank came calling. Dad said, "You're the only one with some savings." Like that was a compliment. He promised to handle it next time. He didn't. Utilities during Grant's layoff. 6 months of electric, gas, and water bills. Never acknowledged. Never even mentioned. One memory snapped back hard. Mom standing in the hallway, arms crossed. "You do it because you're the youngest," she said. "Not because you're owed thanks." Funny how entitlement flows downhill. I sat back in the chair and muttered to myself, love shouldn't be a ledger. But when they turn your love into a debt, you better show the receipt. I clicked New Tab on the spreadsheet and titled it, Impact Statement. Line by line, I began entering not just numbers but context. April 2020, paid $900 for Grant's medical deductible. He said it was just a favor. December 2019, fronted $2,100 for parents' property tax. They called it helping out like any good son would. No more pretending this was normal. I scrolled to another file. Unpaid emotional labor. It wasn't money, it was time. It was presence. It was all the pieces of myself I handed over because no one else showed up. Took Mom to the ER during the power outage. Spent Thanksgiving alone so I could watch over Dad's blood pressure. Covered Alyssa's rent when she left college, no questions asked. Came home every weekend for 3 months to clean up after Grant's divorce. Not once had anyone asked how I was holding up. They called me free, as if not being married or having kids made my time disposable. Then there was the voicemail. I found it buried in an old folder. Grant's voice, slurred, angry. "You think you're better than us? You don't even carry your weight. You're a damn free rider, Cal." I'd saved it, not out of spite, just to remind myself. I hit play again, sat through every second of it, let it land without flinching. Then I opened a blank document, started typing. Not a letter to them, to myself, a reminder, a ledger of truth. I am not a burden. I am not invisible. I am not the problem. Print. 2 pages. I pulled a manila envelope from the drawer, sealed the documents inside, and wrote in block letters, "Read this before you speak to me again." I stood, walked to the hallway table outside my door, and slipped it underneath. That was it. No yelling, no confrontation. Just facts, laid bare. I wasn't here to shame them. I was done bleeding. Back in my room, I turned and saw my old college diploma on the shelf. I hadn't looked at it in years. Skipped the ceremony to work a double shift because Mom said rent was late again. No cap and gown photo. No celebration. I picked it up, dusted it off, and leaned it gently against the stack of receipts on my desk. Not flashy, just a fact. My work had always been here, it just didn't look like theirs. I whispered into the stillness, "You kept the leftovers. I kept the books." Then, with one final glance at the screen, I turned off the lamp. But the light inside me, that storm, it was only beginning. I woke before the sunrise. The quiet in my room felt sharper than the laughter still echoing in my head. Coffee in hand, I scrolled through my phone. There it was, Grant's post. Family first, always. Under it, a photo from last night's dinner, perfectly framed. Everyone's faces bright, except my spot, cropped clean out. They'd removed me from the image. Not an accident, a message. I zoomed in, tracing smiles and angles, noticing how my absence felt planned. The gap where I once stood pressed against my chest. It wasn't oversight, it was contempt. I swallowed the sting and rose from bed. I moved through the morning ritual, shower, black shirt, jeans, like a man walking through water. By the time I reached the driveway, my reflection in the car window registered something new. Lookout in his eyes, not hesitance. I walked into the garage, boxes, old tools, dust motes drifting in sunlight. My fingers trailed across cardboard labels. Christmas 2008, Kid Art School. I spotted a box marked Projects. Inside, my old fourth grade clay sculpture, cracked but intact, labeled A+, never showed. I buried the memory of that night. I pulled out an album. One page had my 10th birthday cake, lit candles, my back turned toward the camera. Another showed Grant and Mom on a road trip. Mine showed the empty seatbelt beside them, Father's voice in my memory trembling. Arts don't feed a man. Calden. As if my worth died that minute. My heart thudded. The neglect wasn't random. It was methodical. Then I remembered the canvas, the one I painted senior year. I walked to the backyard. The old tool shed door was cracked open. Inside, hidden behind broken chairs and paint cans, was that painting. I stood frozen. They didn't lose it. They buried it, a casual lie, a hidden contempt. I held the canvas gently. The colors, once bright, now dull with dust. That night I painted it. I stood proud. I offered it to Dad. He didn't look. Beautiful things unsettled him. That silence echoed in every corner of my life. I whispered. They didn't just ignore my voice. They buried it. I felt no anger, only awareness. I called Mrs. Nolan. Her warm voice cut through the day's weight. She listened. After pause, you always were too forgiving of their silence. She wasn't angry with me. She was freeing me. I told her what I found. She suggested, put it where they can't avoid it. Reclaim visibility. Her words struck deeper than anger ever could. I hung the canvas over the hallway. No dramatics, no announcement. Just there, unmistakable. Later, under dim light, I stared at it. Shadows cast by brush strokes felt sharper. I replayed a Toni Morrison quote. Definitions belong to the definers, not the defined. I let that settle. They defined me once, not anymore. I opened a blank page, wrote truths, small, simple, not demands. Things I knew of myself, things no one could take. Recognition, not acceptance. Before sleep, I stood in silence and said, I'm not the invisible sun. I'm the mirror they refuse to look into. The morning light poured through the blinds in streaks, cutting across the hallway like judgment. I walked downstairs with purpose in my step, but silence in my throat. The moment I turned the corner, I saw it. My painting, mounted on the wall, centerpiece of the hallway. Everyone had paused, forks halfway to mouths, mid-conversation breath caught behind clenched teeth. Grant glanced at it, then me, then looked away. Loretta forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Dad pretended he didn't notice. I stood still, let the weight settle. I'd like us to talk about that painting, I said evenly. No one said a thing. I kept walking toward the kitchen. No raised voices, no eye contact, just the echo of their silence behind me. On the table, I placed the envelope, the one I labeled 2 nights ago. Read this before you speak to me again. I didn't announce it, just left it there, tucked under a glass coaster like any other note. If they chose to see it, they would. If not, that was truth too. That painting on the wall, it wasn't just mine, it was theirs. A mirror they didn't ask for, one that wouldn't flatter. I poured myself some water. No one followed me in. Later that afternoon, I went to the study to grab a book. The door was cracked. That was rare, usually locked. I stepped inside. The smell hit first, old paper and dust. The cabinet on the far wall was slightly open. I pulled it fully and saw folders, familiar ones. Utilities 2019, house maintenance, car notes. These were supposed to be in my room, and then one caught my eye. Family ledger. Closed. I opened it. My name popped up again and again. Calden, paid, March electricity. Calden, covered property tax delay. Each entry a reminder. But then something strange. One note, my handwriting. But the date was off. Wrong year and overwritten. The ink color didn't match. My original words had been tampered with. I sat down in that study chair like the wind had left my body. They'd been documenting my help like it was charity. Favors, not contributions. Worse, someone went back and altered my records. Why? I stared at the entries. I'd kept copies. This one had been changed. Selective memory, written in ink, gaslighting with folders. I walked out, book forgotten. Back in the hallway, I found Jovanda. She was staring at the painting like it might move if she waited long enough. She said quietly, "I'm sorry you felt left out." Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "I didn't know." I waited a beat. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. But I didn't ask for an apology. I asked for truth. Her eyes flickered. She didn't correct herself. She didn't offer more. She turned, walked away, and just like that, the curtain dropped again. I returned to my room, lit by low sunlight now, opened the ledger I had printed, started marking. Left side, what I paid. Right side, what they recorded. I used red to mark altered entries, one after another, cross-reference dates with major family events, Dad's surgery, Grant's layoff, Mom's loan default. My help coincided with their disasters. And still, they erased me. They didn't just erase me, I said aloud. They erased consistency. I opened a new doc on my laptop, titled it, Accountability Request. It wasn't angry, it wasn't dramatic, it was just accurate. I printed it, slipped it into my jacket pocket. By nightfall, I stood in front of the painting again. The strokes seemed bolder, louder. They hadn't just failed to see me, they deliberately refused to. "This ends now," I whispered to the hallway. I grabbed my keys, walked to the front door. Behind me, quiet. As I reached my car, something pulled at my thoughts. I glanced back through the kitchen window. The envelope was gone. I came home after a short walk in the neighborhood, hoping for quiet or maybe clarity. The painting was still there, proud, bold, impossible to ignore. But the envelope I'd left on the kitchen counter was gone, disappeared. No question asked, no glance, no admission. Breakfast felt like a scripted scene. Mom stirred her coffee, Grant talked about stock market shifts, Dad complained about yard work, Alyssa asked about her weekend. Like that could erase the tension. I sat quietly, watching them dodge the truth. They were playing emotional defense, pretending the world hadn't cracked. For so long, I'd retreated with silence. Now, silence became my armor. Later in the afternoon, I wandered to the backyard. I needed air. I saw Grant by the shed, leaning casually, waiting. "So," he said before I spoke, "that painting, is it your new art therapy?" I kept my voice steady. "It's the only thing in this house that doesn't lie." He smirked. "You always had flair for drama. But this is next level." "You want private?" I asked. "You mean hidden?" He raised his eyebrows. "You think you're exposing us? Family business isn't for public display." "Maybe you should stop doing things you're ashamed of," I said softly. His face twisted. He turned toward the house. "You don't know what you're messing with." I watched him go. No chase. I stayed where I was, letting the wind carry the tension back toward the walls of this place. That evening, dinner was laid out like nothing changed. Roast, potatoes, glasses. The table held its breath. Halfway in, I stood. "I know what was in that folder." Everyone froze. Mom's voice trembled. "Folder?" "The one called Family Ledger, the one someone edited." Grant snorted. "You're full of conspiracy theories now." I looked at each face. "You knew what I contributed. You just acted like it never mattered." Loretta reached for me. I pulled my hand away gently. "Stop deflecting." I let it land. This family didn't run on respect. It ran on fear and forgetting. Not anymore. Silence stretched. Mom's tears came, soft and quiet. Alyssa stood and left, heart heavy. Jovanda's eyes went between us. Dad's fork hovered midair, unsure who to defend. Grant slammed his fist on the table. "You think you can threaten us?" I stood in front of him, my heart hammering, voice steady. If you push me, I push back. They flinched because I wasn't begging anymore. I left the table. No slam, minimum noise, just resolve. In my room, I typed in the ledger. Verbal warning issued, 8:32 p.m. Then a blank page. I typed, if they test my silence, I'll test their comfort. I stared at it. It wasn't anger. It was direction. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. Be careful what you dig up. Dinner didn't end. It just stalled. Forks kept moving, lips chewed, but nothing felt real. The silence had shifted from tense to artificial. Then Loretta, still in her seat, set down her glass and stood. Her voice came out quiet, but it sliced straight through the quiet. You think you found your voice, Calden, but all you've done is open wounds in front of strangers. I didn't blink. She kept going, measured, almost rehearsed. This family has given you more than you realize. Someone's been giving you too much credit lately. Her eyes slid to Marlena. Grant let out a soft hum of agreement. Smug. Jovanda looked down at her plate. Alyssa wasn't even in the room. I could feel the burn rising behind my chest. Not from shame, not from guilt, from the insult dressed as concern. They weren't angry, I spoke. They were terrified someone might listen. Inside, I thought, she's not rebuking me out of love. She's covering a crack before the dam breaks. I nodded once, slowly, then I excused myself. The next morning greeted me with buzzes, texts, calls, unread emails. My phone screen filled with messages. Are you okay? What's going on with your family? Fix this before it gets uglier. Screenshots followed, a local gossip blog headline. Private family shame made public by black sheep son. Another. Self-appointed martyr or just another attention seeker? I scrolled, numb, and then I saw it. A cached post linking back to an IP registered under Marlena's PR firm's name. I stared at the screen, stunned but not surprised. They didn't just want me quiet. They wanted me discredited. I whispered to myself, they weaponized the one thing they think matters most in this town. Reputation. Still holding the phone, I opened my notebook and wrote down one sentence. I will not debate lies. Mid-morning, I dialed Mrs. Nolan. She picked up on the second ring. You saw it? I asked. I did, she said, calm as ever. Do I respond? Or let it stew. She took a breath. Silence isn't surrender, but neither is truth a luxury. If you respond, make it unshakable. Don't argue. Reveal. That was all I needed. I pulled the old black folder from the bottom drawer, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside, receipts, emails, signed statements. I added the audio memo of Grant mocking my diagnosis last summer. Then I created a new folder on my desktop, Truth Unleashed. That afternoon, I came home early. The house was quiet, too quiet. As I passed the hallway, I heard whispering from the living room, low, urgent tones. Marlena's voice. Let him blow off steam. The more he rants, the more he sounds unstable. Then Grant. It's already working. People are laughing at him. I walked in, slow, deliberate. Their heads snapped toward me. What are we whispering about now? I asked, not angry, just present. Nobody spoke. I stepped closer. You're counting on people doubting me. That's your shield, isn't it? They watched, motionless. Loretta's face was unreadable. Her silence wasn't peace, and it was calculation. I looked around the room. Try erasing me. See how loud the truth can get. I didn't wait for a reply. Back upstairs, I closed the door behind me. Soft, no slam. I sat at my desk, opened a new document, and typed, This is not revenge. This is accountability. I let the words sit for a moment. Then I walked over to the painting, still glowing faintly in the dusk. I picked up the ledger and placed it beside me. I turned both into a PDF file, named it, Statement Prepared. I didn't hit upload. Not yet. I sat still in the dark, laptop closed, hands resting on my knees. Then I heard it. Footsteps, heavy, unhurried, coming up the stairs. My phone lit up before dawn. I blinked awake, opened the message. Joint account frozen due to irregular activity. My gut sank. I logged in. The balance read 0. Every dollar locked. I dragged myself to my desk and pulled up the ledger. There it was. Transfers flagged weeks ago, masked as charitable payments. Loretta's signature, misdirection codes. I had noted them. I had warned them. And now they were striking back. This was no mistake. This was leverage. Not against me, but against everything I had left. Later, the headlines spread like wildfire. Air freezes family bank account. Son exposes mother's hidden transfers. Account freeze scandal rocks prominent household. I scrolled through comments. One called me spoiled. Another, ungrateful child. The familiar patterns and cruelty disguised as concern, so they came back. Same PR fingerprints, same tactics. I typed one line. Let the truth of the ledger speak. Dinner that night was tense. Cameras lingered. The conversation shied around the edges. Loretta said, "This stays between us." I stood. I held those lines of transfers, those pages of proof, calm, firm. I don't need to shout the truth. You've known it all along. I laid the ledger on the table. The room's pulse shifted. Silence swallowed speech. Grant's face burned red, disbelief and anger. Marlena gripped her glass like a lifeline. Jovanda's voice shook. All this time? Loretta's eyes flickered. Guilt, panic, confusion. I pointed. See that ledger? That spreadsheet? That painting on the wall? They're not relics. They're the proof you buried. I turned to my father. You chose peace over truth. I choose truth over silence. Without a word, I walked out. My steps echoed in the hall. In my study, I backed up every file, audio memos, receipts, scans, into a folder named for release if needed. Drafted a public statement. This is not revenge. This is record keeping. Then my phone pinged. Bank message. Account restored. Only if you withdraw your accusations. My breath caught. Late evening came with a knock. Soft, authoritative. I opened my email first. There it was. An encrypted file, no sender name. I hesitated only a second before diving in. Inside, court motions, digital transcripts, bank statements, evidence so complete it demanded a reckoning. I scrolled through page after page, signatures forged, asset transfers hidden, bank entries manipulated. At least one document bore my mother's handwriting, nestled among other names. The timestamps matched nights I slept elsewhere. They didn't just delete me from their story. They rewrote it. For a long while, I sat with the truth burning in my eyes. This wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. I printed 2 full sets, one for the family, one for my lawyer. I drove over in darkness, pulled into the driveway without headlights, and slipped the sealed packet into the foyer beneath their welcome mat. I stayed in the car, heart hammering, watching lights flicker inside. I thought about turning back. But I remembered, it's not revenge, it's reckoning. Before leaving, I sent a legal instruction to the local bank, freeze all account activity until a full external audit is completed. I drove home under moonlight. In the morning, a shock hit me. The deed to the family home had been quietly reassigned to a trust in the name of Rosa, the longtime housekeeper. The public record confirmed it. The property that once stood for power and legacy was no longer theirs. I checked the notice online. Grant's name disappeared. Loretta's name vanished. The building, once the symbol of their empire, now belonged to someone they once ignored. That evening, they were gathered unaware. I entered, printed notice in hand, quiet but firm. "This is no guess," I said. "This is public record." Loretta gasped. Grant rose defensively. Marlena's outrage flashed across her features. "You can't do this to us," Marlena snapped. I held the notice steady. "I didn't." "You did." Slowly, I read aloud the transfer clauses. Executed per irrevocable trust. Effective immediately. Grantor rights relinquished. Every word a blow. "This house no longer belongs to the fear you built," I added. Chaos erupted. Tears, raised voices, denial. But I stood my ground. Back in my room, I watched calls flood in, news alerts, messages from neighbors. The painting in the hallway glowed, casting long shadows. I whispered, "I never asked for permission. I asked for truth." Clarity settled in. No need for triumph, just confirmation. Then the phone rang. Unknown number. My finger hovered before I answered. It was one of those mornings where the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like something I'd earned. I sat out on the porch with a mug of black coffee, steam curling in the air, and just listened. Nothing but the soft creak of wood beneath my feet and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The kind of silence I hadn't known in years. For the first time, peace didn't feel like something that had to be handed to me or wrestled from someone else's grip. It wasn't temporary, it wasn't a fluke, it was mine. I thought back on everything that led to this. All the late nights pacing the floor, the conversations that turned into accusations, the laughter that had teeth behind it. It didn't make me bitter, just older, more careful. I stood up, stretched, and walked to the mailbox at the curb. The usual stack was there. Ads, a medical bill I'd forgotten to cancel, a letter. Handwritten, no return address. My heart paused. I knew that handwriting. Loretta. I sat back down before opening it, ran my thumb along the flap like I was stalling time. When I finally unfolded the paper, it wasn't long, just 3 words. I see now. No apology, no justifications, no signature. And still, it carried more weight than any long-winded explanation ever could. I folded it carefully and slid it into the back of a drawer I rarely opened. Not because I needed to keep it, but because some things don't belong in the trash, even when they arrive too late. That afternoon, I drove into the city, parked outside the county records building. The clerk's office was as gray and slow-moving as I remembered. I walked in with a folder under my arm and approached the desk. The woman looked over my documents, then looked at me. "So, you're putting the property under your name only?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. She nodded, tapping at her keyboard. "It's nice to see someone reclaim something that should have never been taken in the first place." I nodded. No need for more words. Walking back out under the gold-lit trees, the breeze stirred the hem of my coat. Leaves skated across the sidewalk, not in a rush, just moving forward, carried by something unseen. That's how I felt. Not rushing, not angry, just released. Back at the apartment, I made myself a late lunch. Around 4:15, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring twice before answering. "Calden?" The voice was familiar but older, hesitant. "Yeah, it's Daryl." I stayed quiet. Daryl had been one of Grant's shadows. Never outright cruel, but never on my side either. I saw the news about the house, the files. He cleared his throat. "I didn't know it was this deep. Thought it was just a family scuffle, you know?" Still, I didn't say anything. "You don't owe us anything, but I owe you an apology." I let it happen. I didn't stop it. I should have. I leaned against the counter, phone warm in my hand. "You still live there?" I asked. "No. I moved last year. Different county." "Well," I said, "maybe you can start over too. But not here. Start somewhere nobody knows what you let slide." He exhaled quietly. "Thanks, Calden. I mean that." We didn't say goodbye. Some forgiveness doesn't need a bow on it. Sometimes it's just setting down a weight you've carried too long, even if it wasn't yours to begin with. The next morning, I met with a youth program director in Midtown. We sat in a circle with about 12 kids, boys and girls, teens who looked older than their age, hardened by the world before they even had a chance. I told my story. Names changed, details trimmed, but the truth was there. "How'd you get through it?" one girl asked. "By remembering who I was before they tried to erase me," I said. A boy leaned forward. "Why didn't you fight louder? I would have screamed that place down." I smiled a little. Sometimes silence, when chosen, is louder than a scream. Screaming lets them know you're still giving them your energy. Silence means you're done. They nodded, some quietly, some with that look that says, "I get it, but I'm not ready to say so." Afterward, I shook hands with the staff, thanked them, and stepped out into the crisp air. For the first time, sharing my story didn't feel like reopening a wound. It felt like building something new with it. Back home, I finally unpacked the painting that used to hang above my parents' fireplace. I stood there for a while, just holding it, looking at the brushstrokes. It didn't hurt anymore. I hung it above my mantel. Not to honor them, but to remind myself, I survived it all and still made this life mine. Then I sat down at my desk, cracked open my laptop, and opened a blank document. First line. They mocked me because they couldn't imagine someone walking away and still winning. I leaned back, breathed in the quiet of the room. No celebration, just truth. Some endings don't come with applause. They come with a full breath and an unlocked door. I hit save. Then, just as I stood to stretch, a soft chime came from the corner of the screen. New email. Pending estate dispute. Immediate action required. I stared at it for a second. Then I smiled. Guess it wasn't quite over yet.